Very good. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody from around the world. This is another exciting episode of the Breakout Room, which is where we go to explore what it means to truly be a diversified product, a diversified service, and one that is circular, that takes into account diversity, equitability, inclusion, and the environment. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, and it is. It's a major concept that we have taken years to understand, rather from greenwashing, I'm going to be doing this, or DEI washing, I'm going to be doing this, to actual actionable items. And we're going to be exploring a little bit more about that side of things. We have Susie and Ivana and Teresa here, and Ivana actually brought it to my attention that it is actually Circular Economy Month, Circular Economy Month, which we're going to go into a little bit of detail, and I'll have her actually start off by giving an introduction to herself, a quick little bit on what it means for the Circular Economy Month, and then we'll get on to the other introduction. I'll introduce myself. My name is Cindy Guion. I am the founder and CEO of LinkingVentures, and we're changing how startups start. At the most malleable level, startups are what will change the world. Ivana, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Ivana Stragacic. I'm the founder and of Strategies for the Environment. We've been around for 21 years now. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm an environment, health, and safety management system and compliance consultant. I have a small boutique firm that operates out of Ontario, Canada, but we service the world, primarily Canada and the US. I'm an engineer by trade, and subjects like circular economy is something that has evolved over time from, well, we all know the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. And that's become a very much an antiquated phraseology. Now it's sort of evolved over time into circular economy. And what it is in a nutshell is looking at not just controlling pollution. So the 3 R's were all about making sure that our pollution, our waste, go into the right stream effectively so that we utilize it. Circular economy is about pollution prevention and going up the business cycle and going all the way into the design cycle and the production planning to make sure that we don't think of cradle to the grave, where we're looking at products going straight into the landfill, single use, or even recycling, because recycling takes energy as well. We're looking at designing our products and the production processes so that we don't have waste anymore. We have byproducts that become somebody else's raw materials. We have products that at the end of the day can be taken apart and properly recycled. A number of years ago, the problem with the automotive industry was that the plastics in things like the dashboards couldn't be recycled because you had things like fire retardant chemicals within the plastics, which stopped it from being recycled. And all the plastics were sort of melded and meshed together instead of being able to separate. And so you really need to go up into the design cycle, into the design part, to think about how can we have different plastics for different jobs and different materials, but have them come apart easily so that we can reuse them, recycle them, or even upcycle them into other materials. That's another term that we're starting to use a lot more now, is upcycling. But what we're trying to do is, the circular economy is about changing the mindset and not necessarily having to force people to reduce what they're using, reduce consumption, minimize what they do, because that is really hard for people to do. But it is for people who are producing products to really understand and design intelligently and design effectively so that the use is not straight obsolescence, those single-use plastics, those kinds of things, but also what can we do with those materials and those so-called waste? Let's call them byproducts. Let's look for other opportunities to sell them to someone else to become their raw materials and actually make more money for our companies. In a nutshell, did I do that good?
You did it great, and that's a great platform to kind of move on. Is upcycling and the byproduct and looking at that whole circular side of things. It's really that beautiful opportunity to have a startup, recreate, reimagine, and as I just said, startups are the ones that are going to change the world. They're at the most malleable level. So from the circular economy level and then onto the diversity and inclusion level as well, both actually involved having a broader perspective and opening your eyes to beyond just your lens, right? And I'd like to have Susie introduce herself as well, because you have that insight into the diversity and inclusion side of things as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cindy. And it's great to be here, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. But before I introduce myself, I want to respectfully acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the traditional ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations, also known as Vancouver. And I'm very grateful for the original stewards of the lands. I'm Susan McCallion. I'm the founder of Social Mission Canada, and I believe that doing well and doing good are not mutually exclusive, which is pretty apropos to what we're talking about. And whether you are operating a for-profit or nonprofit, I think it's really important to have the mindfulness and the sustainability in mind. And years ago, the term sustainability has taken on a new form as well. So we're not only talking about environmental. Nowadays, we're talking about practice. We're talking about mindset. We're talking about financial. So it's a holistic sustainability. Hence, the UN's SDG has been introduced to the market for years now, and I think the people are embracing it. What I think when I hear you talk about the circular economy, Ivana, what brings to mind for me is being mindful, period. And in project management, we always say, start with your end result and work it backwards. And to me, that's exactly what it's about. And that concept isn't anything new. It's something that we've practiced for years, but it is really reassuring to see that that's actually translating into the day-to-day business operations. And manufacturing is one of the sectors that contributes biggest to the economic and job growth within Canada. So they do have quite a bit of an influence. So I'd love to hear the sector side of it from your perspective at some point. But definitely the one and done concept from what I'm seeing is no longer. It's being able to understand how our individual practices are creating sustainability and how it's actually impacting the rest of the community as well.
Thank you. And that kind of I actually did not really read the land treaty for where I'm from, so I'd like to take a moment to do that as well. So I'm actually in Collingwood, which resides within the territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which includes the Chippewas of the Nawash unceded First Nation and the Saugeen First Nation, and home to many Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. So thank you. We should probably have that sitting at the very beginning, because that's definitely who we need to learn from in terms of how to give back to the land that we're actually taking. And I want to introduce Teresa Singh as well. So Teresa has a very unique perspective on DEI issues as well as environment as well. And I'd like to welcome her to the table as well.
Can't imagine what I can add to that. I have the pleasure and the privilege to work with Cindy Guillon in LinkingVentures. What you both said is what I was thinking. The ESG. I'm a big person to fix my appliances, to hack a way to keep things going forward, to keep reusing them, and to avoid using anything in the first place. So you don't have to reuse. It's just I think there's another art for that. I can't imagine adding any more than what you both said. Many thoughts were going through my mind. The solar panels, now they're doing it in the windows, the roofing and all that, and it's so smart. So many great opportunities for startups to take this opportunity to move it forward.
And I do want to, and thank you, Teresa, so that I wanted to kind of take this in a very open forum. So if you have something, please do speak up. There was one part that really caught me, and I have another quote that I wanted to share because I wanted to meld a little bit of the two together. So again, we're looking at this from within the startup ecosystem, all of these issues, because it is a place where we can affect the most change. If we try to approach things or try to affect change from the corporate level, we have to monetize it very quickly, which is very difficult to do. If we try to do it from the government level, well, it takes too long, and by the time anything really happens, they're probably voted out. And if we stand strong and proud for whatever group we represent, whether it is an environmental activist group, whether it is women, whether it is people with different abilities, however we stand strong, we see that it's not met with the ease that we would like it to be. So then we take it back to this perspective of startups, and people listen to startups because it's new, and you have those early adapters. And once those early adapters, because they're always the cool ones, buy into something, then all of a sudden you get this movement, this growth. And I like to use the video from Derek Sivers, Sivers, who did The Lone Dancer. And this was a Woodstock style dancer. He is obviously inebriated, but having so much fun, but he's doing it on his own. And a stranger comes out of the crowd and starts dancing with him. That's the first follower, right? So that's the startup, and I call him the Steve Wozniak, right? And then you have the Steve Jobs that comes in and follows, right? That's the brain, that's the marketing. And all of a sudden, that first follower's friends come in and join. And all of a sudden, you've got something that's interesting, that's cool. And all of a sudden, you'll see everybody else kind of come in, and layers and layers and layers. And that's what the startup followership means. It's starting something, building in that marketing mechanism, or that first follower that kind of builds out and goes on and goes on and goes on. How do we then apply that to this? And there's two things that really, so Susie, you mentioned start with your end results and work backwards. So that's one thing. And I also had this wonderful quote from Melinda French Gates. And this is specifically around gender, but I want you to open your mind. This is the lens I kind of look at it from, being a female, but I want you to all kind of think about this in your own context. So what lens you bring to the table. We will not use the complexity of resolving, in this case, gender inequality, as an excuse for failing to think or act more intentionally about putting women and girls at the center of what we do. So think about that from your own lens as well. And I want that to be really a platform for the next part of our discussion. From the startup perspective in the ecosystem, how do we then turn around and inspire startups to think from a diversity and inclusion perspective and an environmental perspective? And I have to kind of pull in, because we're all, I deal primarily in technology. And the number one thing that startups neglect to think about is about their data and data storage and the amount of energy that is being used for something as simple as this call, right? So how do we put this forefront in their minds to think about the holistic picture, so that end result, and then working backwards? Ivana, we'll start with you.
Oh, now that's the $1 million question now, isn't it?
$1 billion now, isn't it?
$1 billion question now. Yeah, because when, a lot of people, I remember you had to make your databases very, very lean and mean and very precise about the data that you collected and what you could collect, because storage was so expensive. Do you remember when, buying a floppy disk was like tons of dollars, and then all of a sudden the CDs, a package of those, were lots of money? Now I can buy a terabyte drive like this for $50. It's storage is cheap, but how cheap is it really? Because of the impacts on the environment, and all these server farms are are costing a lot to just to operate, and the energy and that they consume. Now, where was I going with this? We were talking about how do we change the mindset. Ultimately, when I talk to my clients, the one thing that I like to tell them is remind them about basic science principles that they learned in school. Like there's the conservation of mass, the law of conservation of mass, and the law of conservation of energy. Neither one is created nor destroyed. It's always there. And when it comes to growth in the economy, in the environment, in the world, there are limits. And new ventures, business people, they keep thinking growth, and with that there's no limit to this growth, and they fail to realize that, okay, yes, as an imagination, as a dream, there is no limits to your growth, but in real world thinking, there are actual limits, physical limits to growth. And if we maybe start by thinking that way and then figuring out how do we minimize, or how are we most efficient with that, or how do we continue to grow but allow others to grow as well, not necessarily compete with us, but if we're not careful, even other sectors will start competing with us because they have similar resources that they need. I mean, we're already competing for resources. For example, did you know sand is becoming a scarce resource? Sand, of all things, sand, because you use it in glass, in my glasses, on my computer, to make chips, to make silicone chips. It's becoming a competitive resource. And whether you are making drinking glasses or you're making, cell phones and cell phone covers, you're not in a competing industry, but you're competing for the same resources. So if you start thinking that, okay, yeah, we can grow our company quite large, and we don't want to limit our imaginations as how we can grow as an organization, but there is a risk to trying to grow beyond our resources and the resource capabilities. And again, that's all about the risk assessment that we all have to do. And I know, Cindy, you are really looking at those risk assessments carefully. And I know we've had many conversations about that. And that's something that I think maybe that's a first step that could help. Does that make sense?
It actually really does. So I want to talk a little bit about a trend in investors that are actually investing in clean tech investors. And clean tech investors right now are investing in a holistic way. So there's a whole different mentality to the way investors invest. Okay. So, or clean tech investors specifically. So they're not looking, because they need to dream farther. And the investments that they're making are in, well, let's face it, saving the world, right? There's a different outcome that they look at. So if we take a look at their perspective then, and here's the interesting trend that we're seeing in clean tech investment, is that they don't invest in just that recycling company that's repurposing something. They invest in that whole circular business. So with all of the partners. So this company is playing this part, this company's playing this part, this company, and they're investing in maybe 10 startups because it acts as a full holistic circular economy. That's perhaps what we should be doing with our approach, not just from the environmental perspective, but also from the diversity and inclusion, because it's that type of thought process, unique thought process, that we can bring to the table if we have people with different experiences, opportunities, all of it. Susie.
And actually, that's a great segue to one of the points I was going to, circling back to your question originally, is that, when we think of it from the lens of a startup, and number one, I think I love Melinda Gates's quote, because I'm always a believer of keeping things simple, and there's the sophistication is in the art of simplicity, because even taking something overly complex, there is an art and talent to taking that and really boiling it down to its core essentials and making it manageable, because that's what makes it sustainable and relatable, so that you can get buy-in from everyone you're speaking with and they can actually connect to it. And most startups, from what I see, and I'm in the social impact space. I work with social enterprises and B Corps and for purpose-driven organizations. The intention is right. We all start out with the right intention. Keeping the trajectory and keeping our eye consistently on the same prize, I think, is the part. That mindfulness, I think, is what keeps the sustainability of it. And the one way I found out to do it is exactly as you say, is connecting with an ecosystem. Because not only does that get rid of the redundancies that we were talking about, Ivana, before, about why it's a recycle, reuse, and those are data terms, I agree, but why create something from scratch when something already exists? So conceptually, why aren't we holding hands, and instead of competing, creating a co-opetition instead? And competition is a fantastic thing. That's how innovation happens, is that you want to get to the next better version of yourself and next better version of the product. And I think that's a wonderful thing. But what if we do that together collectively and more holistically? My gosh, what we can create, and how much bigger we can create, and how much more sustainable we'll be. So yeah, I just wanted to add that piece.
And that's kind of working in that blue ocean environment. So Blue
Yes.
Ocean, amazing book, basically talks about how to Blue Ocean Strategy by W. Chan Kim and Renee Mauborgne. We'll add those into the show notes. But the Blue Ocean Strategy really takes a look at your competitive landscape, as in there's this vast area for which we're allowed to be our own unique and build our own unique component. But what it does then is, because you are unique, the partnerships that you can have that come out of it really amplify your uniqueness, as opposed to going, you're a competitor and you're an indirect competitor, and all of a sudden you've got this separation and you're in that red ocean where there's so much competition because everybody's out to get me, right? If we do work together, if we do build our ideas in unison almost with other solutions, there's a lot of that circular thought process and circularity that go in, not just from an environmental standpoint, but I would argue also from a diversity and an inclusion standpoint. What would be the best way to start that connecting that ecosystem, of building out that ecosystem of connections within a supportive environment, specifically as it relates to startups? Hi, Guillaume. Feel free to join in.
Yeah, okay, I'll jump in on that one. I think let me just briefly introduce myself. Guillaume Clough from Validate Tech. I also love collaborating with Cindy and Teresa on a bunch of startups, and when it comes basically to the whole competition thing, it's more the old school way of looking at the ecosystem itself, where we're than you, so we need to compete and things of that nature. But at the same time, I recently saw an old interview of Steve Jobs, where he actually said the difference between believers and doers is that the doers actually have the balls to pick up the phone and ask for help. And that's one of the main things when it comes to the whole ecosystem. It's like, hey, I'm trying to get from A to B. How you're maybe already at C. How did you either do it, or can we collaborate in a certain way where both of us actually end up winning? And I think that's one of the main ways how a ecosystem can actually thrive together. Because right now everything is very fragmented in the whole ecosystem. So that's my 2 cents on that matter.
Yeah, I love that. And that inspired me to also say that, both from your point perspective, and I'm 100% on board with that. And also if we place our mission beyond our own personal agenda. So if we're here to make a social impact and to embrace DEI and to embrace the environment, or embrace efficiencies, or embrace whatever your mission happens to be, and whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, we all have it. If we look at it from solving a community problem, and again, whether you're for profit or nonprofit, we're all here for the same reason, is to solve community problems so that we can be sustainable. Whatever you're solving, what you're targeting is the minute you take it beyond yourself and your own company and your own agenda, and you make it part of the community mission, that's, to me, is the pivot between working in a silo versus reaching out to saying, hey, what are you doing? Because it sounds like even what seemingly is a direct, traditionally, as you say, direct competitor, I will bet you, and from experience, I can tell you that their style is different, their goal is different, their unique culture is different, their product is different, and you're going to find some synergies. Even one nugget will bond. It's very, very strong bond. So think beyond your own agenda and think on behalf of the community would be my advice.
And I just want to add to that. And there's some really interesting case studies where even large global corporations have found that, even if they're completely profit minded, that have found the fact that when they're community minded, they actually will benefit overall as a company as well. And the classic example that I like to use is Nestle in India. I don't know if you've heard that case study, where Nestle actually, because they have to use local dairy wherever they produce from, right? And so in India, they were purchasing from local dairy farmers, as they normally would do, but they invested in those dairy farmers so that they could increase their production, keep them as sort of local farms as opposed to large factory farms. And in that way, those smaller farms then were able to produce better quality milk, hire people locally with better salaries. Those people were able to send their kids to school because there they have to pay for it. And in turn, it uplifted the whole community, which in turn bought Nestle milk and Nestle products because they had the money to do so. And if you think corporately, and purely selfishly, sociopathically about increasing funds, you cannot think of yourself as an isolated silo, an isolated island. You have to think about your impact, because whatever you do outside of your company is going to come back to you as a potential risk or a benefit, depending on what you send out. It's almost, I like to call it business karma. It's
I love that.
there.
I love
It's
that.
there.
And on the flip side of that, if we look at it from the consumer's perspective, I don't have a statistic in my back pocket to share there, but there's enough, if you Google it, that consumers are also willing to pay even a little bit more, and some a little bit more than that, to pay for organizations who are supporting the local economy, who are making sure that their community is prospering while they're prospering. And it's not just about the price point. So it's, you're investing in your community. You're not just buying a product, really.
Mm-hmm.
And investing in your local logistical ecosystem as well. So as a startup, if you know, and you can start at that ground level, making those partnerships, that each one of your partners is also adhering to the same cyclical standards and DEI standards, then DEI standards, then you've got that kind of built up all the way through your full ecosystem because you started at that ground level. Really wanted to pull on the part that Guillaume mentioned about the ask for help. And I came across an interesting article talking about building in diversity and inclusion. And the very first step, and this is from Lillian Zhao, XIAO, and she had done a little bit of research on how to build out this process. And the very first step that she has in building an inclusive design is seek out points of exclusion. And I would argue that that same seek out points of exclusion can be used in everything that we're doing at this very level, including with the environment. So if you look at areas of exclusion from an environmental standpoint, as you're building your company up, it's going to give you a whole different perspective. And the same with anything for equitability and inclusion. What are your thoughts about having that as a first step for building the ecosystem and building your own company as a platform?
I think when it comes to the whole inclusion part, before you even attempt to actually go from A to B, you first will need to know what players you actually might need or what expertise you might need to go to that point, because that gives you a sense of what you don't need. Might sound crazy, but then you actually know that, okay, I'm trying to know the financial state of my startup. So it would be good to talk to Cindy because she knows everything about valuations. And she can clue me in on things that I probably might not know. So with regards to that, I would definitely say it starts with the initiator that actually wants to ask for help, at least having an idea of where it is that they're going. And what Ivana mentioned with the Nestle example, I don't think Nestle had that full idea in mind for the community when they started, but knowing where they wanted to end up, that was a good enough start for them to be able to collaborate with that local community. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and I can add to that as well. You know, I had to go back and read the article really quick, Cindy, after you sent the link. From my commercial and then back to for nonprofit and social perspective, this is what I normally flag as identifying where the gaps are. So you could either approach a product or service development from your mission perspective, which obviously that's a given. On the reverse side, though, understanding what's out there and what's not being done and the opportunities that you could address with your product and service really is the frame that at least the lens that I'm looking at this and very exactly my thoughts when Nestle sought out, and just like any other organization, when you first put out your product, your service, you're pushing your individual perception of what you believe your problem or service is solving in the industry. But as you get through it and as you start getting traction and really understand, again, as a startup, as you're getting traction, you start realizing that what you're putting out there versus what your customers are telling you that they need, could be there could be a gap. So again, that goes back to working it backwards. So I know some product developers who do the exact opposite, which is what this article is saying. Before they land on their product to take to market or to develop it, they go and do their research first. And I call that the viability check. You go out there and you check to see who else is doing it, how many other products exist or services exist, where are the white spaces between those products, the white spaces meaning the empty space spaces, the blank canvases that no one's really touching, but the market actually needs, and the trends are showing you, and then you bring that, and that's your starting point for your new product development. So working it backwards, I would say, and the gap analysis.
And that's where you find opportunity. How many stories
Beyond
do we know?
what you actually had in mind.
There's
In some
stories where
cases.
people have tried to be entrepreneurs in a company, then go off. I think Zoom is one of them. Go off and say, I'm going to show you, or find the opportunity and go do it and hockey stick it.
And I think that that's really, I mean, we've and I love how this is naturally transitioning from here's all the problems or here's all the opportunities, because we started with problems, moved very quickly into opportunities, and then talked about, you know, from a corporate perspective and a startup perspective, and we're kind of making that nice little move right into tools. So we've got the gap analysis, and we've got working backwards, and we've got the seek out points of exclusion and the viability check. What tools do you think would have a profound impact? And I know this is one of those questions that there's so many possibilities, but can you think of anything that you can imagine as a tool that would open people's eyes up, especially from an environmental impact? We don't think about our environmental impact when we're starting a company. It's one of the last things we do unless we're a clean tech, right? And from a diversity and inclusion perspective, we don't think about that as a startup either, because we're so busy with our own lens that we forget that there's other people in the world. From an analogy from women, where the other 51% of the human population is a viable part of your niche market. What tools do you think should we try to build, or if they're available, incorporate to help us broaden our perspectives, open up our lenses?
One thing that I do as sort of a foundational activity with some of my clients is the risk assessment. Plain and simply. On the environmental side, we call it environmental aspect identification and evaluation. On the health and safety side, we call it hazard identification and risk assessment. On the general business side, we call it process mapping and risk assessment. It's really depending on, no matter what lens, if you do it as through a single, you know, environmental lens or a broader business lens that covers all of those areas, a risk assessment where you identify, well, what are our issues, both internally and externally, that can impact our overall goals that we're trying to achieve. And then identifying, well, where are our risks and where are our opportunities? Because opportunities are just the positive side of risk. It's that uncertainty. And so risk is the negative, opportunities are the positive, and identifying those. And then, as Susie mentioned, we look for those gaps. What do we have control over? What have we established? What controls have we established? And those gaps where we don't have controls in place, or we don't have some kind of a process or a barrier to protect ourselves. For example, we're handling very flammable, combustible materials. We don't have fire insurance. That's a gap. That's a risk. We're going to put that into place. But we do it in a systematic way. So it's not just, what should we do today? You put it in place. And then I even take some into an exercise of prioritizing them by actually adding numerical scale values to help prioritize, so they know where to put their resources, not to compare them as an absolute, but sort of to make that list, give it an order, because we only have so much time, so much resources, but then you have a systematic approach to it. That's what I usually do. That's the tool that I bring to my clients typically. It's not new. A lot of people have different ways of dealing with it, but yeah, and that's where a lot of people are going these days, especially with things like the ISO standards. They're all going to that risk approach.
And I think that's brilliant, Ivana, because unless you stop and think about it, and someone maybe pinpoints some places that you might have blinders on, or you're so busy running that you don't think of these other things that you have done, and you're that person who makes them think, write it down, and move forward. Brilliant. Brilliantly said.
I would actually add to it with the Japanese ikigai, because one way of processing information is, yes, by getting the X's and O's and the pure data with regards to new projects and things of that nature. But what typically tends to hit home is whenever somebody believes what you believe. And with the Ikigai, you can pretty much get a sense as to where the stakeholders, what motivates the stakeholders. And then from there, kind of bring everybody together on another level where you already put forward on the table as to, okay, this is the rational reason why you're doing it. And this is the emotional and mental reason why you are so motivated to reach that particular goal. So that's the one tool that I would add to that risk assessment that Ivana mentioned.
And I mean, we've talked about several tools, the viability process, the feasibility, sustainability I mentioned, and I won't repeat the other ones, but the one that it's always in the mix for me, and it's sort of the true north, it keeps everyone on the true north, is the impact measurement. Absolutely crucial. And the reason I say that, aside from it being a process tool, and there's a lot of impact measurement tools depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it. At the end of the day, I think we all agree to say that we're all here to solve a community problem. And we all launch a startup to save the world in our own way. I think and I do this myself, and I work with my clients to do this. We want to measure what it is that we're actually doing to see if we're actually changing behavior, because really shifting behavior change is what it really needs to come down to. So whatever it is, whether it's DEI adoption, whether it's SDG, whether it's, the environmental, regardless, financial sustainability, whether you're educating someone, whether you're coaching or consulting, at the end of the day, you need to do something different in order to get different results. And for me, impact measurement is almost like a sanity check to say, okay, let's identify what is it that you're trying to do? How are you going to define your success factors? And how often do you need to go back and check to make sure you're actually on track? And making sure that one of your success factors says that you're doing what you're going to say you do, and your consumers are actually behaving or responding the way that you want them to respond. So for education, to me, is the most simple thing. Is, I mean, there's myriad of webinars and books and contexts and teachers and conferences and so on. And I mean, and I'm an avid lifelong learner. I mean, I don't even know how I'm going to be able to read all the books I want to read in this lifetime. So, and for me, the biggest nightmare is I won't get a chance to read more than 10 books, whatever, 2 months or whatever my goal is. But the point is that I can read, but if it's going to come in one ear and come out the other, and I'm not really changing. So, power of habit is one. Is my behavior changing as a result of reading that book? So that impact measurement to gauge your behavior change is absolutely crucial. Sorry, I started talking about books and I get really excited, so I'll pull back.
And I love that, and I think that is so critically important, is the education, and I mean, I'm actually learning so much from just having these conversations, right? So what I'm hearing is that it's not enough to just have these tools. You also have to make sure that you're accountable to those tools, because what gets measured gets done, right? So, and that's applied knowledge, right? We have this checkbox change where we're all going around going, yay, I hired somebody to be on my team, but they don't actually do anything, but they look good there. Or, yay, I used recycle wrapping paper to buy my coal burning fireplace, right? Greenwashing and DUI washing, it's not enough to just go, oh, I do this, so therefore I feel good. It's about creating actionable change and that measurable outcome. And I wanted to bring a little study that I had brought to the that I had done to the table, because Susie, you mentioned education side of things too, right? And it's the power of suggestion, the power of education, because it's not enough for us to say this should be done. We still have to bring it to the front door of the people that don't even realize that they're not doing it. And that's, I had an opportunity to talk to about 50 startups because I was testing out an idea, and I said, okay, tell me about your persona, about how they would navigate through your product and or service use. And they navigated me through that. And I said, okay, great. Now tell me how a woman would navigate through your product. And they took me through and went, wow, that was much easier than I expected. So sometimes it's as easy as, here's a suggestion, and then, oh, by the way, here's the tools to do it. So power of suggestion, power of education, power of a book, power of communities like, well, what we're doing right now, right? This is really the beginning of a community as well. What are your suggestions then on how to do an actionable change with the tools that we're talking about? How do we get them into the hands of the people that don't realize they even need them?
Well, I think that might be a bit tricky question, especially not knowing if you need something. But I believe it all starts with having or at least being exposed to certain environments, certain information, because unless you are in an environment where you see a different outcome or a different scene, you don't know that you're missing out, or you don't know that something can be done differently. And I loved the point that Susie brought up as to behavioral change. And that is the most tricky thing because it can be cultural, it can be on so many different levels. But I think that would be one major point that would need to get a lot of attention from.
And I'll add to that, the key is the data. It's the proof is in the pudding. So for those who are not practicing it, I find first you have to find them. That's the hardest part, is to identify those who are not practicing, so you could speak to them. So once you get over that hurdle, is to showcase some statistics from companies who are actually doing it and how much the benefit is. So showcasing the benefit of those who are practicing what needs to be practiced is the quickest way that I've found, because that at least gets the conversation going for them to turn around and say, what do you mean? If X company, if you hire more than 2-3 energizers who are big, who could be impact ambassadors within your organization, it changes the entire culture of the organization. Just with those 2-3 people, because they're so excited about the mission that they're going to get everyone. It's like this energy pull, right? And there's actual statistics that showcase that. So I'm a data person, and for me, it's everything is straight up. So anyway, showcasing proof, I think, is where I would start.
Yeah, it's that old adage.
Unfortunately, I have to sign off, but definitely thank you, ladies, for this great insight. I'm gonna connect with you guys on LinkedIn, so we can definitely keep this moving.
And I do want to wrap up. I think that this has been an absolutely amazing start to a very big question. And I'd like to welcome you all back to join us again for the first Tuesday of every month at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The next one will be related to intellectual property and how that fits into the DEI and environmental side of things as well. Susie, Ivana, Teresa, thank you so much. I'd love to hear some closing thoughts if you have some short closing thoughts.
Well, in my world, I talk about co-opetition. I mentor and judge at robotic competitions, and we talk about co-opetition. And also in a business environment, there's always a tension that's needed to create the new ideas, to have that push and pull. So that's my 2 cents worth, that everything nudges 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and we will get there.
My closing thought is environmental awareness and in being a good sort of steward of the environment does not contradict having a good, strong, growing business. In actual fact, it's the exact opposite. When you talk about good metrics and you can't measure what you cannot manage what you don't measure. I love metrics and data. It's that increased yield of productivity, reductions of waste. They are all in line. Those are terms that people use in business and in the environment. They coexist. They work together. They don't work against each other. It's just a mindset.
I always say Social Mission Canada is a business with a mind of a for-profit and a heart of a nonprofit. And there's a reason for that. And as I said it in the beginning of our opening introduction, that you can do well and do good at the same time. And I think, and I genuinely believe in it, and hence my entire existence of a business and what I do for my clients. I would just encourage us all to really recognize that we're all, regardless of what space we're coming from and how we're plugging our talents into helping our communities, that we're all doing the same thing. We're all here on the same mission, that I think doing it collaboratively is going to get us there so much quicker, and it'll be more fun besides, to be honest.
Collaboration is fun. Teamwork is fun. That's what the ecosystems are based on, right? Yep. And I love that analogy of being able to do well and good. They don't have to exist in their own separate silos. And I always leave the end of these with the same story. I was running after my friend who lived around the corner from me. I saw her up ahead. I ran up, Hilda. Got to her, realized it wasn't her. Kept running around the corner, yelling her name, Hilda. So for everybody out there that feels like they're running up against a wall, just keep running and waving, you'll get there. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next month.